Welcome to Tell Me More, the all-steel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hi, welcome to the Tell Me More podcast. Today, we're going to wrap up our mini-series on trauma-informed design. In our first episode in this mini-series, we talked about the impacts of trauma and a little bit about the vocabulary around this conversation. In the second episode, we touched a little bit on design considerations in the space. And today we want to dive into some of the questions, some of the concerns we've heard as we're sharing our work around this topic. And I am so delighted to be joined today by my colleagues, Jordan and Rikki. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Rikki.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Thanks for coming back for another episode. So I want to talk a little bit. We have been doing, this work for some time. We've been out in our field sharing this work, sharing our content, learning from the people that we're talking to. I want to talk a little bit about some of the questions that we've gotten over those conversations, through those conversations, some of the tough conversations we may have had to navigate. So the first topic I want to talk about is this idea of, does inclusive design require us to carve out more space for our floor plan? Do we have to invest in more floor space if we want to do inclusive design fully?
Rikki, you want to start?
Sure. I guess I would say the answer is no. You don't necessarily need to have additional floor space just to look at your workplace through the lens of trauma-informed design. So much of what we've been trying to talk about with people is that we're trying to create spaces that are just naturally there for people to support their needs in the moment, that they'll naturally gravitate towards. Cool. So it's not about special spaces necessarily. Right. It's about considerations of little tweaks that we can do to existing spaces to support people, no matter, if we're trying to dissuade dysregulation or we're just trying to create a space that they can re-regulate.
Well, and I think that anchors into the idea that I think we often share, which is what's exciting, I think, to all of us about this idea in general is it's not this whole new body of work that requires that we just scrap everything that we've ever done and start over with a completely new set of considerations. A lot of the things that we talk about have deep overlap with overall kind of well-being practices that have overlap with just good design practices. So at the end of the day, in many cases, what we're doing is we're not, to Rikki's point, we're not carving out new spaces. We're adjusting or tweaking or placing a different lens on existing spaces that allow for a broader set of accommodations or considerations to be met.
Totally. I think wellness rooms, I feel like at least the projects that I've been seeing, it's a standard at this point, right? I think it's code for a lot of them. This will be my plug for having the mother's room or lactation room be separate from a wellness room. Yep. I don't believe that we should have mothers and people seeking respite having to be at competition with each other, right? So that's my plug for please make them be separate spaces. But
those are all two different functions, right? Like the act of lactating and the act of finding respite or taking a moment after having a tough conversation. Those are two very different activities. Right. I've even talked about the reality that in some cases in a wellness room, it might be beneficial to have two people, right? Because I want to talk to my counterpart about the experience that I just had, but it's unlikely that I want to invite someone else in to the lactation room or mother's room when I'm leveraging that.
Correct.
So does that wellness room then require more floor space? Or are we taking that from some other function in the office?
I think if you're looking at maybe a facility that was designed 20 years ago before wellness rooms were more common, it's looking at it and carving it out a little bit, but this isn't a huge space that we're talking about, right? Like, I don't even know that you would necessarily say it's an 8x10, but if you can provide 8x10 worth of space for it, that's probably somewhat ideal, just because we've talked about this ability to you're likely going to have a couch so that somebody could lay down if they have a migraine. But if somebody literally needs to be on the ground to have that kind of centered moment, providing that space. It also, again, you could have yoga there, you could have prayer there,
Prayer.
etc. So, so much of what we talk about, there's so much overlap. It's not just trauma-informed design that we're allotting for. There's many other functions that we're also supporting within that space. We're just having an additional eye or lens on what else we can add or subtract to make sure that the vast majority of people are supported within the one space. Again, we're not saying there's one space, we're saying there's multiple spaces. So that's what makes it, I think, a little bit easier and a little less challenging, is that we have that ability to kind of spread it among the entire ecosystem of a workplace versus just saying like, here's this one thing that needs to be for your entire population.
Yeah.
Right.
And it is so interesting to me. I'm just thinking a lot of the conversations I'm having are around how do we provide exciting and compelling amenities for people to have access to, which includes coffee bars or rec spaces, and why wouldn't this also be part of that conversation as well if we're considering these other human needs that we have in the office?
And not that I don't love coffee or a rec space, but I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is this reality that while those are nice and those might be a draw, we need to start at the bottom, like the base of the pyramid. Right, Lauren? Like this level of safety. Yes. Like we need to start with this level of safety where I'm not going to come in for the espresso if I don't feel an ultimate sense of safety and belonging.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. As good as that espresso is, if I don't feel great in the space. Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, and I love that idea too, Rikki, of thinking outside of the floor plate as well, and how like people are integrating outdoor spaces into their floor plans more intentionally, and amenity spaces as well. So wellness doesn't just exist in the wellness room.
Right.
One other question I sometimes get is, how can we possibly, what is the answer to inclusive design? How do I possibly do this if every single person is bringing unique needs? What, everybody needs something different, something particular. You're telling me I have to take in all of these different ways that we are diverse, ways that we process trauma. How can I possibly do this? Is that a question you've heard before or commentary you've heard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, there's a couple of things that come to mind as we think about this idea. On one level, this idea that we know what all the answers are, I think we also need to let go a little bit. I think we talked about this in one of the other podcasts, Lauren, this idea that we are speaking in draft, like we're speaking with the amount of information that we have today, and we are continuing to learn. So I think it would be incorrect of us to assume that there is a correct answer and we know what it is. First of all, right? And then I think secondarily, we talk about this idea of how do we understand the depth of need or the precision of need across the population, and how that's A, unlikely, right? And B, kind of intrusive, especially as we consider the delicacy of some of these conversations. So historically, when we plan space, we like investigate to understand all the levels of possibility. But in this case, that's not necessarily the primary way we should learn to understand. And so I think ultimately, we are solving for the needs of a broader population, but not down to an individual level, right? We're not creating a space for just Lauren and a space for just Rikki, but hopefully if we're thinking thoughtfully and broadly about the needs of the population, then Lauren's going to find those pieces of what she needs, and Rikki's going to find those pieces of what she needs.
Totally. I think the other component too, though, and Lauren, you give this example, or I've seen you give this example before of like how inclusive design can be beneficial to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And it's the sidewalk ramp, right? Like it's something as simple as, oh, it may have been originally created for people that were in wheelchairs, but like, oh, if I'm pushing my kid in their little bassinet, that helps them. If I'm dragging my, suitcase through Chicago, it helps me with that. Like there's so many things that it's like the intention might have originally just been for one person, but the reality is that multiple people can benefit from it. And so I think that that's what we started to look at once you guys did this research and you started to see like, oh, if I did this could be helpful. Like the side-by-side seating being the easy one, right? Like that side-by-side seating banquette can be something that I, as somebody, just naturally gravitate towards because I want to force somebody to have to sit side by side. But even if that's not something that I need, the other individual can also leverage that space, right? It could also potentially give me some closure from or enclosure from the back. So there's like multiple ways that one little setting, if you look at it a little bit with a little bit more thought, you can be like, oh, okay, I'm checking a lot more boxes than I originally understood that I was checking. And so that's what I think is so great about what you were able to put together was it's that little push of like, let's just have one more look at what that space could be. Could I tweak it just a little bit to check another box, but it's not making it special. That's, I think, the
Right.
thing that I've tried to point out to so many people is we don't want people to have to ask. Like if there's some people that are very comfortable asking, and I think that that's fantastic for them, but there's such a huge population, especially of my generation and older, that aren't necessarily as comfortable asking
Or
for
don't
this,
know.
or don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So but you will just naturally gravitate towards the thing. We do
Yeah.
that, just human nature. And so I
Right.
think that that's where it's like, you know, to your point, we don't have to have all of the answers. We don't have to know all of the variety that's going to show up in our population and how to support them. But if we're thoughtful about it, we'll hit most of those marks, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the intention.
And I think it comes back to this idea of universal design and inclusive design, and universal design really being we're all have to use the same spaces and we're all going to use the same places, and that's great. But inclusive design does sort of acknowledge this idea that we might not use all the same places. We might make different choices
Yeah.
based on our individual needs. I sometimes get the question, you know, how much percentage of my space should be high stimulation and how much should be low stimulation, how much should be moving. And my pushback is often, do we have good ratios for anything else in our workplace right now? Like we don't know, how much is focus work and how much is collaboration? We don't really even have good metrics for that in this moment in time for broad swaths of the industry.
Right, but I think the whole point is variety, right? And that's what
Right.
we're starting to see. It's like everybody works a little bit different, everybody thinks a little bit different. So even if you take out trauma-informed design as a layer, in general, that's how we're starting to plan. You're seeing that being much more successful as a way to support people and make them more productive. Trauma-informed design is just another lens of like, how do you make somebody more productive? The more we can dissuade dysregulation, the better, the faster we can create spaces that allow people to re-regulate, the better. I mean,
Yep.
the reality is that's what we do in workplace. We are trying to make people more productive. We know that this can be a limiter for people. So we need to address it at some level. Do we have a perfect ratio for it? No, but we can start to learn over time. The more we apply these ideas, the more we can watch and learn. So I think that's where that variety, like you have to put a stake in the sand and make at least an educated guess, but
Right.
is it going to be the perfect guess? No, because everything's constantly kind of fluctuating and changing, right? And I think in general, what your workforce population is and who that is, some organizations have a much higher turnover than others, right? And so I could tell you day one, maybe what that ratio should be, but like in 2 years, that might need to edit. So
Yeah. So how do you accommodate for that? How do you accommodate for that changing
well, you know
needs
me.
over time?
I love flexibility. So let's talk about
Yeah, let's
flexibility.
talk
Let's
about
talk
it.
about it.
No, but I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Is like all of these things are interrelated. When we start to look at variety, there's X amount of variety that we really want. I mean, I think there's variety, there's that ease of reconfiguration so that if something isn't resonating or isn't supporting people, what else can I do with that space? And maybe it's just a matter of like swapping a few pieces in or out or enclosing the space or making it not enclosed. I mean, there's a variety of ways that you could change it, but the whole point is that if you're not planning for change within your ecosystem of workplace, whether it's space types or furniture, you're gonna fall behind, or you're gonna have a harder time adjusting to the needs of your workforce.
Well, and I think when we think about what we're talking about right now, we are relatively new within this conversation, right? This is a relatively newer topic that we as an industry have been exploring. So back to this conversation about speaking in draft, the truth is like, we know that we're going to continue to learn more. I don't think we're necessarily going to learn that, sitting side by side is bad, but, we're going to learn more about the implications of that. Maybe it needs to be more broadly utilized within the floor plate, or maybe there's some other considerations that we would want to blend in to the discussion. So I think that reality of flexibility outside of the traditional kind of constant of change, as we think about kind of applying this kind of science to the workspace, is going to continue to evolve. And I think we'd be silly not to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I think we are this is definitely a new conversation in the industry, and we're loving the research that we're doing. I guess I'll pose it as a question. Do you think this idea of trauma in the workplace is new? I mean, I'm not sure we've always had the language to talk
Yep.
about it, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can
I
remember
think,
that
yeah,
people going to their car to have a moment,
yes.
right?
Well,
Leaving the workspace to have a moment.
I think managing trauma in a healthy and meaningful way in the workplace is new.
Yes.
Right? Like I have told stories about my own, experiences in the workplace and things that have been really hard. And back to Ricky's point about productivity, not to make it all about ROI, but this idea that like if I had a way to self-manage, then maybe I could have stayed. Right? That day that I had to go to my car or I had to go home, I had to leave. Maybe I could have stayed and, maybe it's not about as many emails as I could tippy tap, out in that time that I had left during the day. But I think even more than that, it's this idea of being seen and being acknowledged for kind of your whole self within the workplace. And I think that's a little bit newer. This
Yeah, and
idea
did
that
you
like
want to come
that's
back the
valued.
next day? Like
Right.
maybe
Exactly.
that day was done, right? Maybe you
Yeah.
weren't going to be
Out.
productive, but did
Yep.
it change your attitude to come back the next day or the next
Right.
week or whenever?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that the conversation, like trauma has been happening in the workplace as long as the workplace has existed. But this conversation about how do we
Yes.
meaningfully manage trauma in a healthy way within the workspace, I think is relatively fresh.
Well, and the recognition that there's varying levels of trauma, right? And there's
Hmm.
varying levels of how we react and respond to it. So things that the way people were reacting before, because it wasn't for whatever reason considered under the umbrella of what trauma was, it wasn't labeled that way. But the reality is like you start to see those similar responses, right? Of
Yep.
in different degrees. I mean, I talked about this last time, right, Lauren? It's like I feel like when we do talk about this conversation with people, we all start to be like, especially when we go through the different types of
Hmm.
how
Trauma
we
response.
yeah, trauma
Yep.
response. It's like I'm a fawner. I tend to fawn quite a bit. Like it's because it's my way of being polite, I guess, is part of it as well. But it's not the most healthy way, like especially in work or in personal life. It's one of those things that it's like, but now that I see myself doing it, I'm starting to recognize and try to be like, okay, let me push back on this. Or to your point, like let me try to figure out why I'm acting this way. But I mean, I think it's one of those things that it's like in general, and I've talked about this before, it's like we're at a place within society and within like talking about workplace where we're actually thinking about the human. And that's the big difference between now and versus like when we were first starting our careers. It's not
Yep.
that nobody cared about us or cared about they didn't care about their employees. It's just we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it as a society, and we never saw it as a responsibility of an organization. Whereas like now, if you fast forward through multiple things that have happened in the world since we all
Yep.
started our careers, we're finally actually, our organizations do care about us. I mean, even if they're being selfish and it's through the lens of productivity, I'm cool with it. Like,
Right.
I want to be productive too. It makes me a happy person to be
Yes.
productive.
Right.
So the
Yep.
more I can get support from my organization, from the people around me, whether I want to talk about it or not, knowing that it's there, I think it's a great place to be in workplace and in the world, that we're actually having these conversations and being thoughtful about it. So
Agree. And
Okay.
as I've talked about this topic recently, I have shared, I don't know if you guys have had similar experiences, but when I've talked to clients about this, it is typically not something that they're necessarily bringing and asking for, but I will often tease out some of these concepts to gauge interest. And what I am heartened by is that I don't think I've ever felt a full dismissal of this discussion. I have only felt curiosity, openness, interest. Maybe some are less interested than others, but I think that the word trauma, we talked about that in the first episode, Lauren, can be kind of scary, and the conversation overall maybe we can assume that a client isn't going to care because they are A, B, or C. But I'm not afraid to bring this up to every client that I talk to, and every client that I talk to is interested, at least on some level, in understanding more about what it means. And to me, that's exciting. And Rikki, to your point, that brings it back to this reality that there is a refocus on the well-being of the human being, whether that's for like out of the goodness of their hearts or because they understand that it connects to productivity and ROI.
yeah,
Either way, I'm feeling that on like the granular tactical client level, which is super exciting.
That
yep.
is exciting. And I think this trepidation around everybody needs something different and things are going to change, and how do I accommodate that is daunting in one respect, but also it's not different from other things that we think about in workplace. Everybody needs something different as far as what they need to be productive in the workday, just as far as technology or what their space looks like. Our work is going to change over time. So if we can just start to accept trauma-informed design and inclusive design as part of that change, maybe that makes it a little bit easier to plan for, a little bit easier to accommodate.
Agreed.
Okay, one question I have gotten in the past is, how do you know this works? Prove it. Have you heard this feedback?
I haven't asked anybody to prove it, but
I first want to say that we are doing research here. We are continuing to plug away at this question to really understand the implications of the design considerations we're talking about. We are continuing to evolve that research, but there are a lot of unknown questions. We don't know like what percentage of, wellness we're increasing by doing side-by-side sitting. We don't know what percentage we're doing of mental health we're advocating for by having a wellness room. We don't have that research. But at the end of the day, we just sort of have to believe that taking care of humans is going to be good for business, good for our, attraction, retention, our productivity. I don't know. It's like air quality, right? We want good air quality because it's healthy for us, right? We want healthy, happy employees because it's good for us in general.
I mean, I think if there were more specialty type spaces that were required to support TID, I think there would be more people pushing on this prove it thing. Although people want to understand, cause, reaction, etc. But I think it's one of those things that it's like nobody's denying that there's trauma, right? Nobody's denying that people are neurodiverse. Nobody's denying that people are physically diverse. So, I mean, it would be interesting as we start to see these ideas implemented more and more, if we could start to see a connection between overall satisfaction, engagement, and productivity. I mean, the engagement number is always like the interesting number for people. There's multiple things that feed into engagement, but being supported and having the space to do the job, the right tool for the job idea is a huge part of engagement, right? So can we say this one thing does it? No, there's multiple things that fold into there, but it would be interesting over time. I think we could start to make a better connection between that. But again, it's because it's like, this is something that's fairly new. It's, some of these space types already existed, but some of the little tweaks and adds that you guys have kind of found within the research that we can start to apply, that's new. So you're not going to prove it like within a week, right?
And it's not helpful to wait either. If some of these things are easy to do, waiting for the evidence is not helpful.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think for me, at least in these conversations that we're having today, the proof point is in the relatability of the conversation, right? Rikki, you talked about this kind of this self-reflection that happens oftentimes when we have this discussion, which candidly, every time we talk about trauma-informed design, it doesn't necessarily turn into like a trauma dump at the end, but there's usually some sort of discussion about historic experiences, personal experiences, and understanding them in a different way. And I say that because I think the proof point is in the reality that as we talk about this, people can relate to this need to self-regulate. Like I'll tell a story about self-regulating in the wellness room in Chicago because I was feeling overwhelmed. And that's like a highly relatable moment that people have experienced and have experienced the benefit of having that space. So I think as we learn more, as we build out holistic data around this, I think we can anchor into the practicality of how relatable these experiences are, right? How relatable it is to feel like I'm going to cry at work if I have to talk to someone eye to eye about this. But I can feel like in my core how much easier it would be to talk to someone about this if I didn't have to look them like deep and directly in the eyeball.
Exactly.
So I think there is that kind of self-reflection and relatability that comes along with this conversation that is enough of a proof point in the short term to validate that there's meaning in talking about what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Just the stickiness of the conversation itself is evidence. Rikki, you said everyone can acknowledge that we have trauma. Everyone can acknowledge that there is neurodiversity. And I have heard, giving these talks, a few people pushing back to say, I made it through. I did it. Shouldn't everybody be able to suck it up? Or, maybe sometimes we get sort of stuck into these generational differences about, how much can we ask for and how much can we, for lack of a better word, placate individuals who need something different. Have you had these conversations?
Many.
Oh, absolutely.
Please start, Jordan.
Yeah, so it's an interesting conversation. So when we first started building this content, Lauren and I actually intentionally added some verbiage into the deck because we assumed, actually, I've had less than we anticipated, Lauren. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yes.
But we did build into the content some commentary around this. And the commentary that we built in is this idea that, like, if you feel yourself reacting a certain way to this conversation, consider why. Right? Consider why. The reality is, like, the world as it is built likely benefits you. But you have to consider the reality that it may not have benefited everyone surrounding you in the same way. And what drives me bonkers is the conversation around, like, if I had to deal with it, then someone else should have to deal with it too. Like, I don't have time for that. But, like, the reality is, if you are saying that to me, you are acknowledging that that is not the best way to approach it. Right? You are acknowledging that there is a better way to do it. Yep. And if we are aware of that better way of doing it, why would we not do it? Like, what's the point of making everyone else suffer just because you walked uphill both ways to school in the snow? You know what I mean? So that's the discussion that I've had. And I will say it's rare that I get that kind of response to the conversation. It's rare that I feel that. And I will say, if that does happen, usually it's dampened by the overall agreement by everyone else in the room that this is important and that this matters, which is also kind of powerful. And back to that original point of, like, the universality and the like connectivity that we're feeling to this. In some cases, that is even serving as a counterpoint to some of that push that we might receive on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point, because I would agree, like, I haven't had to have this conversation a ton of times, but when I do, it is typically kind of trying to point out that, like, I think we could all agree it's not healthy to just push it down. Like, it might be how we were raised, because definitely of a generation that was raised that way, don't get me wrong. But we also know that that's not the most healthy way. And so if we can just continue to try to move forward, I think part of it, when I've had the conversation, I pointed out to that person where it was like, part of what we're trying to do with a lot of this research and these areas to support this is that you as an individual don't actually have to ask. Like, that's been, like, when they kind of have that aha moment of, like, oh, wait, the younger generation may be more willing to ask for the things. You don't have to be jealous of them. You will just have the things and you don't have to ask for it. We don't want to put you in an uncomfortable situation, just like we don't want them to have to be in an uncomfortable situation because we were raised to just suck it up. Right. So I think when there's a little bit of that realization of it's not every single little minutia thing is going to be special. It's that we're just creating better spaces that support people, whether you want to ask for them or whether you just naturally will use them and be supported. That's when I think people kind of have that aha of, like, you can still ask for it. That's cool. But if you're not comfortable with that, we're trying to create a space where you don't have to do that. But it is interesting. It definitely, I would say, is generational typically. I've rarely come across somebody significantly younger than me that has pushed back on any of this content. It tends to be my age or older. But we'll get
what I also have had interesting conversations around, and this also ties into neurodiversity, where we as human beings find it easier to say that kids need help or that we want to help the kids. So thinking about spaces for children, for people, or for like higher education, like those considerations are easier for us to acknowledge that we need to provide them extra support, right? But once they leave that education space, it kind of like our willingness to accept or support that kind of goes away. And it's not that we grow out of those things, right? If I'm neurodiverse when I'm going through a higher education facility, I'm neurodiverse while I'm in the, space that I'm in when I'm working. In the same way that if I've experienced trauma as a child, we want to surround those kids, those young people with support in order to support them. But now that we've made it into an adult, suddenly it's less okay to support. And the reality is, in that transition moment, we are literally just expected to manage.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's how we process things or whether it's the trauma that we carry. So I think there's a little bit of like a cultural breakdown that we're trying to move through. And thanks to younger generations, I think that's becoming more and more common, where it is okay to not be okay. Right. Yes. It is okay that I've had these experiences and they are affecting me, even if I'm not a young person. Right. Even if I am an adult. In reality, in space, like it would be naive to think that I am also not impacted by things that touch my life.
And we're not saying by any means this is not going to be hard for anybody. There's a lot of challenges still that people are going to have to face in the workplace. We're not saying that this is going to fix everything by any stretch of the imagination, but there are very easy things that we can do to eliminate some of these barriers to make our spaces more inclusive. Why wouldn't we at least explore those ideas with empathy and sensitivity and wholeheartedness?
Yep, absolutely.
Are there any other challenges that you guys have run across when you're giving these conversations? Any pushback that you've heard?
No, I mean, I think it's the same, a different question for what we just talked about, but it's like, well, why should we care? Why should this be something that I do? But it ties back to that, I think, even more closely to Jordan, what you were just talking about of like, you have this younger generation that has been talking about mental health and wellness much more than any other generation. They've also, not all, but a lot of them have had spaces within their schools to support movement, to support being able to get away. And so there's an expectation as they move through that education system that once they get into their career that they will still have those spaces. So if you care about hiring the younger generation, you probably should have spaces like that. Like you can't just say that you care, you have to show that you care. And I think that, again, it's one of those things where you at least need to start today. Organizations need to incrementally start getting there. It doesn't need to be this huge thing, but you need to be starting to think about it and how it's going to show up and what it means to you as an organization to support
I love
the younger.
I love that. And we don't have to have all the answers before we start, right? We can just take steps to get there.
Totally.
And just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Well, I just appreciate you both. I appreciate learning with you and exploring this area. Thank you so much for joining me today. So this will wrap up our mini-sode on trauma-informed design. We look forward to future episodes of the Tell Me More podcast.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at Allsteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue exploring the Design to Do More philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.